Okay, so we are going to get started. We're essentially just going back through the PowerPoint that you guys were supposed to read through yesterday. Again, if we come across something in blue, feel free to take some notes because you are going to need some notes for your notebook check. But keep in mind, you had yesterday to kind of get the notes done, so I'm going to be moving pretty darn fast. There's some questions embedded in this PowerPoint that I may or may not ask, but for the most part, we're going to move through the things that I think that are the most important I'm going to spend more time on, but especially in the beginning phases with the very origins of Islam, a lot of that stuff is more about building context than anything else. So if you have questions, ask them, but I'm going to be moving fast, so just try to keep up. Additionally, we do have a few video clips that are going to kind of go along with this that again, I'm trying to focus on things that I think could come up again on future assessments and stuff like that. Just a couple reminders, Friday we do have the half day. Bell schedule is listed here. I may have mistakenly said yesterday that we were only seeing some of our classes. That's what I thought, but we're actually going to see all of our classes. It's just every class is going to be incredibly short, most of them about 20-ish minutes, I believe, 20, 25 minutes. Grades have been updated. Unless you were like missing something, for the most part, what you're seeing in Skyward is where your grade's going to sit for the 6 weeks. I may tweak a couple things. There's some situations where I might like bump somebody up a point if they're at an 89, they did really good. You know, I sometimes do bump people up. But your grade should not at least go any lower than it is down. It may go up a tiny bit, but again, we'll just kind of have to wait and see on that. As far as grades for this week, tonight before midnight, if you have not done that discussion board yet over Islam and kind of this PowerPoint, please get that done. And then on Thursday, we are going to have an SAQ. The SAQ is going to be timed. I'll probably use 15 minutes this time around. But most of the class on Thursday we'll kind of spend preparing to do the SAQ. So if you're still a little foggy on it, no big deal. We'll get you squared away, but know that those things are coming. Those grades aren't going to count for this 6 weeks. They're going to go on to the next 6 weeks. I don't want to, kind of launch any surprises on you. Lastly, if you are missing assignments, I am still willing to accept those, but only through Thursday. Thursday at midnight, all those assignments are going to lock, and kind of what you have at that point you have. All right, so let's talk about the rise of Islam from its birth to its so-called golden age, and we're more or less talking from 610-ish CE to 1450 CE. Here we go. This should look familiar to you guys. And we're not going to go back over it, but this is the bubble map you should already have in your notebook somewhere. Again, for this PowerPoint over the last couple days for our next notebook check, you should have this bubble map, which if you weren't here, guys, there's a completed version still on the board. And you should have, at least some notes over this PowerPoint, specifically some of the stuff in blue. Islam. Founded by the Prophet Muhammad in the city of Mecca in what is now Saudi Arabia. Again, this is a religion much like Judaism and Christianity that comes out of the Middle East. To Muslims, Muhammad is their greatest prophet. He is not only the founder of the religion, but he is the last in a long line of very prestigious prophets that are important to a lot of different religions. Specifically Judaism and Christianity. Muslims, they believe in Moses and, of course, Abraham and even Jesus, although they don't agree with his divinity. To Muslims, Muhammad is the last in that long line. He's the one that finally gets God's message completely right. Born in 570 AD, Muhammad grew up to work as a shepherd, a merchant, and ultimately a caravan manager. We will talk about caravans in this class. Once we get done with this initial kind of global tapestry unit where we're just kind of highlighting some of the key individuals and groups around in the world at this time, we're going to talk about those trade routes. We're going to talk about, the Silk Road and the Trans-Saharan trade routes and Indian Ocean trade routes mainly. And one of the ways that you see those overland traders, really kind of get products from point A to point B, usually through a lot of different middlemen, is the use of a caravan, which is just essentially a group of people, especially traders, sometimes religious pilgrims, traveling together over vast distances. A lot of times on these trade routes, you saw the establishments of what we call caravanserais. Caravanserais. It kind of depends, the pronunciation is a little bit different. This is some good vocab. I would definitely have this down. A caravanserai, I think I'm going to pronounce it like that from now on, was a roadside inn where travelers could rest and recover from their day's journey. These are important because especially during this time period, a lot of those early day caravanserais, they end up growing over time into some of the new trade cities of the post-classical era. Plus, they're kind of hot spots, not only trade and being trade hubs, they're also hot spots for cultural diffusion. So a guy like Muhammad, who was a caravan manager early on and was a trader and traveled around a lot and would spend a lot of time at places like these, he would have had an opportunity to talk to people. And naturally, when individuals share with one another, sometimes they talk about their beliefs. See, in the Middle East at this time, most people were still polytheistic. Most people still believed in many gods. But at this time, 570s, 600s, monotheism was on the rise. You had Judaism. You had Zoroastrianism, which we really haven't talked about that much, but it was popular in the Persian Empire. You had Christianity. So he was exposed to a lot of these early ideas. And even though he lived amongst groups of people that were still largely polytheistic, he likely had a lot of influence from those monotheistic people as well. During the course of his work, I just said that, Muhammad regularly came into contact with Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. And again, when you come into contact with all these different beliefs, it's natural that those could have an impact and help develop your own belief system. From a young age, Muhammad had a deeply religious nature and often meditated on the nature of existence itself. So here's how the story goes, and let me let this person in. So, the story goes as this. It's kind of the birth of what eventually will become the Islamic faith. When Muhammad was 40 years old, he had a vision of the angel Jibril, and this is kind of depicted in the kind of bizarre artwork here to the left. The angel Jibril, which is kind of the Arabic version of Gabriel, the same angel that Jews and Christians may be familiar with. This angel basically came to him in the name of God and commanded him to convert the Arab tribes, who were largely polytheistic, to the belief in a single God, known in Arabic as Allah. The same God is the Christians and the Jews ultimately worship, but from there, through Muhammad's teachings and revelations, some beliefs will change about that God. The followers of what eventually become this new religion will be called Muslims. And here I ask if there's anything strange about the picture, and there's a lot that's strange, but one of the most obvious things is Muhammad. He has no face. And really, in most Islamic artwork, you will not see any living creatures whatsoever. And it kind of goes back to that fear of people worshiping graven images or worshiping idols. There was unfortunately a lot of idol worship in the Middle East at the time. So one of the tenets of Islam is, you don't produce artwork, you don't produce any sort of imagery of Allah or Muhammad, or really life itself, typically. Sometimes you will, but again, that is something a lot of Muslims do find to be incredibly offensive, because again, it goes against some of their beliefs. This Allah was the same God worshipped by Jews and Christians. After his vision, Muhammad started to preach belief in Allah to the people of Mecca, gaining followers and influence in the process. Not all appreciated Muhammad's message, and he made many enemies. here's this man, perhaps more, perhaps a prophet, who was living in a land where people believed in many gods, where those many gods were still celebrated. And he's basically going around telling everybody, you guys are all wrong. These gods you believe in, they don't exist. There's only the one God, the true God, Allah. Mecca at this point was kind of a thriving center of idol worship. That Kaaba stone that we'll see here in a minute, that's still in the center of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. I mean, it was a pilgrimage site for people to come and worship all of these many idols, these many gods that they represented. So he's challenging the establishment. He's challenging people's beliefs. Because Mecca was a trade city and a site already for religious pilgrimage, he's also challenging the pocketbooks. He's challenging how they make money. And a lot of people did not like Muhammad. Much like years earlier, a lot of people didn't like Jesus. Again, anytime someone claims to speak to God or represent God's vision, you know, it's just kind of natural that people would maybe think that they're off. Maybe they're crazy. Maybe they're making it up. I mean, how would you guys feel if I came in here tomorrow morning and I start class and I say, all right, guys, something big happened last night. I was hanging out on the couch. I was watching the Cowboys game. They got one on Sunday, miraculously. But I was watching the Cowboys game and I heard a knock on the door. I thought it was the pizza man. And I opened up the door and God was standing there. And then he came in and we talked and he told me some secrets. And now I'm going to tell you. What'd you guys think if I came in, I don't know, Monday morning and said that? Don't be honest. You wouldn't believe it. Maybe you would, and that's cool. I like that. But some of the rest of you guys would be like, Mr. Brown has lost it. Mr. Brown's been smoking crack or something on the weekends. He's not with it anymore, right? Guys, it wasn't all that different back then. When people say that they have this sort of religious or spiritual or supernatural experience, not everybody's necessarily going to believe it. Some people do. That's how you get these religions that eventually start. But in the early days, Muhammad had a rough time. A lot of the people, a lot of the leaders of Mecca were just ticked off at Muhammad, and he had to leave. He thought he was going to die. So fearing for his life, Muhammad fled to the neighboring city of Medina in 622 CE. This flight or escape from Mecca, called the Hijra, marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar, which is a religious calendar, but it's lunar by nature. It's one of the reasons that Ramadan is a different month every year. In Medina, Muhammad became even more popular. And after 10 years, he was powerful enough to gather a very large army of followers, an army that was well organized, an army that eventually would try to retake that city of Mecca. And this is an important point, and you need to remember this. You might want to write it down. Here is the big distinction between Muhammad and a lot of other religious leaders. Like Jesus or Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. They never ran a government. They weren't military generals. But that was part of Muhammad's role very early on. He was a military, and a good one, in addition to being the foundation of this growing religion. So that whole idea of politics and religion in Islam, that's always been intertwined, really since the very beginning. And that's something you really didn't see amongst the leaders of these other faiths. In 630 AD, Muhammad and his army conquered Mecca, and they converted its people to Islam. To this day, Mecca is the most important city in the Islamic faith, and Muhammad considered this conquest, although in the early days it was fairly bloodless. Some people did die. Other battles, obviously, a lot of people died. But he considered this conquest to be something known in Islamic culture as jihad. Have you guys ever heard the word jihad? All right, you need to know it. If you didn't write it down, please write it down. Jihad refers to the struggle to protect and extend the influence of Islam. Some view this as an internal struggle. Most Muslims view this more as an internal struggle. but others use it to justify war. Others, of every religion, there's extremists. And Islam sometimes gets a bad rap for Islamic extremism. In this country, the individuals that attacked us on September 11th, so we just had the anniversary, they were Islamic extremists. They attacked us in the name of jihad, like it was a religious war. Again, most Muslims say this is nonsense. That's not an excuse for violence. But there are some, of the most fundamental and extreme branches of that faith. Of the most, extreme version of that faith that do consider the, violence such as this to be justifiable. Take a look at that picture for just a second. All right, so what you have here is a picture of the Grand Mosque. When devout Muslims go to Mecca as part of their Hajj, that's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. This is one of the many places that they go. You see all those white dots and the black dots. And I'm not sure what the black, that may be Shiite Muslims, I'm not really sure. But guys, those are all there to pray. All there to be in the presence of the Kaaba stone. This was a shrine that was in Mecca that had been used to kind of house all these different idols that people would worship. And Muhammad came in and reclaimed it. And he said, this is for Allah, the glory of Allah. He even claimed years earlier that before this was like a pagan shrine, that it was actually built by the prophet Abraham, the founder of Judaism, which, Muslims obviously honor as well. When people go to Mecca, they bow down, they kind of pray towards this. But you got to understand, they're not praying to the shrine. They're praying to what it represents. Allah giving Muhammad the power to recapture the city and dedicate it to the Islamic faith. 2 years after capturing Mecca, Muhammad became ill and died. The revelations which Muhammad reported receiving until his death form the verses of the Quran. Regarded by Muslims as the direct word of God and around which the Islamic religion is based. That's something that we talked about the other day. The Quran is different than the Bible or other holy books. Like, the Bible, the Torah, the Talmud, the list goes on and on. Yeah, those were kind of written by people considered to be prophets, but it was by men. And men are fallible. We translate things in different ways. This is not the case with the Quran. There's no real wiggle room there. It is believed to be the direct word of God as dictated to Muhammad. By the time of his death, most of the tribes of the Arabian Peninsula had been converted to Islam. Islam united the various Arab tribes with not only a common religion, it also gave these tribes a common language, Arabic, which is still the most popular language and ethnicity in the Middle East and North Africa to this day. Within 100 years, Islam would grow to control an area larger than the Roman Empire, stretching from Spain and Morocco in the west to the edge of India in the east. This is the Arab Muslim Empire at its height. And this is around 800 CE. That is huge, guys. That's most of the Middle East. That is Muslim Al-Andalus, which was Spain and Portugal. Muslims controlled that peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, for many years. It's most of northern Africa. And if you look at, some of the areas that Islam is really dominant to this day, it's obviously more widespread now than it was back then, but it kind of matches up. It's really that spread of the Islamic faith that helps to build this into a distinct cultural region. Anybody ever seen this building? It's a a very famous mosque in Islam. It's the Dome of the Rock. Today, this is in Jerusalem in Israel. Israel is the only predominantly Jewish country on earth. It is very, very sacred to Jews. It's very, very sacred to Christians. I mean, that's where Jesus lived and ultimately was crucified, and Christians believe was resurrected. But it's also very sacred to Muslims. At this spot, and this gives you an idea of just some syncretism, some ideals here. This is where the Jews, built the first Temple of Solomon and rebuilt the second temple. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was housed. The container in which the Ten Commandments were believed to be held. This is the spot years later that Jesus, when he went to Jerusalem, there's in the Gospels, him going to the marketplace and flipping up the tables of the moneylenders. It was right there. This is the spot where it is believed that when Muhammad died, he ascended to heaven. Again, later on we'll get into Israel and Jerusalem specifically and why it's so important and why there's been so much violence over the years between these three groups to control it. It gives you some indication. Let's talk about Sharia law. Again, Islam, it is obviously a religion. It's the second most popular religion in the world. But, it also kind of has its hands in politics. It's always been that way. Islam as a faith, the leaders of the Islamic faith have always had some leadership in politics as well, because this goes all the way back to Muhammad. And to this day, some of the countries where Islam is the main religious, it also serves the backbone of its government. It also serves as the backbone of its legal system. We call this sort of Islamic law Sharia. Sharia. Developed by Muslim scholars after the death of Muhammad, the Islamic code of law known as Sharia outlines behavioral requirements for daily life. This is where you get a lot of those kind of ancillary beliefs that maybe, they're a part of the Quran, but they kind of just fulfill Muslim obligations. The requirement of morality and honesty. The idea is that gambling, drinking alcohol, eating pork should be forbidden. Polygamy is allowed in some circumstances. And this is rarer and rarer, but back in the day, you saw it quite a bit. Does anybody know what polygamy is? What it is? It means a man can have more than one wife. Again, it's pretty rare now, but you do see it sometimes. Muslims were not to enslave other Muslims, Christians, or Jews. Now, that does not mean that these Muslim empires did not practice slavery. We will talk about that. But typically speaking, other people of the book, that was avoided. Women were to guard their modesty by wearing a veil in public. We talked about the idea of women dressing very modestly in the Islamic faith. Again, that's more dependent on the specific area of the world that's being practiced, but that sort of modest dress is definitely there. Although there were restrictions placed on women, in particular, patriarchy was somewhat offset by the command that women were treated with respect. Now, this is important. Unlike many religions and civilizations of the time, women enjoyed the right to inherit, have dowries, divorce, own property, which it's kind of strange, but let's look at it this way. Islam sometimes gets a bad rap for being overly patriarchal, okay, where men have more power, have more privileges, and to some extent, in some countries, that is very much true. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, and I know they've been kind of pushing for change, but I believe, women still don't have the right to vote. They still aren't allowed to drive. They still aren't supposed to, go out in public without some sort of male family escort. So on one hand, you look at the world today, and in some areas, Islam is very patriarchal. But the weird thing is, back during these time periods, it was probably less patriarchal than most other faiths, most other civilizations. I think the big thing is, as time progressed, in most of the world has gotten less and less and less patriarchal, Islam maybe hasn't decreased that theme at the same rate. But again, it's going to be different depending on what country we're talking about Islam being practiced. Excuse me, I'm trying to talk too fast. Many Islamic nations around the world base their laws on Sharia. Again, you go someplace like Iran or Afghanistan, I mean, the laws of the land and the laws of Islam are virtually the same. In most Western countries, we are what they call secular, which just means there's a separation between church and state. But in a lot of these listed countries and some others, there is no such separation. Which goes back to the idea of, Muhammad, even in the beginning, he was a political leader and a spiritual leader. And that sort of overall theme has kind of continued on throughout history. Now we're going to talk about the concept of caliphate, which is a really big thing for you to understand. During the time period of Muhammad, they conquered a lot of territory. Really almost all of the Arabian Peninsula became thoroughly Islamicized during his lifetime. That is a pretty large amount of conquest in about 10 years. After he died, some of his successors, the first 4 caliphs, and we'll talk about who they were here in a second, they spread the faith further throughout the remainder of the Middle East, to parts of Central Asia, even into Northern Africa. Sometimes this is called the Patriarchal Caliphate, or the Rashidun Caliphate. And then in the years that followed, a new caliphate or Islamic empire rose up to continue that work. They were called the Umayyad. But you're looking in less than 150 years, this is the Islamic world, or Dar al-Islam. And just the sheer amount of territory they were able to conquer in such a short period of time, it's nothing less than amazing. So let's talk about, some of the early caliphates. But before that, you look at the areas that they conquered, and sometimes the religion spread in other ways as well. But you look at the distribution of religions to this day, I mean, oftentimes you look at, certain areas and what they believe and how it got there. Warfare, colonization, which oftentimes is the same thing, trade, travel, missionary. I mean, that kind of explains the religious distributions we see still to this day. When Muhammad died, a group of Muslim clerics chose a new leader, Muhammad's father-in-law, Abu Bakr, who they called a caliph. Caliph literally means the leader of the Islamic faith, or successor to Muhammad. The caliph was in charge of this new form of empire we call a caliphate. Caliphate is just an area governed under Islamic law and ruled by a supreme religious leader. Ruled by a religious leader. Think back to geography. Does anybody know what type of government that would qualify as? The government in which, the leader of the religion is also the leader of the land. It's not a monarchy. Ancient Egypt would be a great example of this. Actually, a lot of civilizations throughout history, would qualify as this to some extent, because we've already said, a lot of early leaders of various empires and states also have some religious authority. So we got any ideas? The word you're probably looking for is theocracy. Theocracy. Most Muslims, after the death of Muhammad, they had decided that Abu Bakr, he should be the next caliph. But not everybody agreed. A small group known as the Shiites decided that only Muhammad's descendants could be caliph, blood relatives. That is what really caused that original shift, that original split in the Islamic faith. This division exists to this day, with the Sunnis being the majority, the people that wanted to follow Abu Bakr, and the Shiite being the minority. And those are still the main branches of Islam that we still have to this day. Close to this time period, you're going to see a very similar division in early Christianity. In the early Christian church, it was essentially the Roman Catholic Church. But after years and years, especially after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Western Europe went Catholic, whereas Eastern Europe, under the then Byzantine Empire, went Eastern Orthodox. And for many years, those are really the only two big branches of Christianity. A new term starts to be used during this time period. And that term is Dar al-Islam. This is really important because a lot of times we're referring to this kind of area of the world simply as that. The term Dar al-Islam is essentially the house of Islam. And it's come to refer to all of Islamic culture and the lands in which Islam is the dominant faith. So essentially, all that area, where Islam, even to this day, is dominant. Or back then, all that area that these caliphates covered, that's part of Dar al-Islam. And still, anywhere where you see Islam is the main sort of religion, it still kind of goes by that name to this day. As Islam expanded, the caliphs converted or enslaved other peoples they found worshiping many gods. Remember, going back to Muhammad's early mission, he's trying to convert the polytheistic people, but not so much the Jews and Christians. I mean, of course, you could convert, but Jews and Christians, because of their similar kind of lineage, being considered, quote unquote, people of the book, they were generally treated with more respect. That being said, in Islamic territories, and this is something definitely worth knowing, Jews and Christians could live there, but they weren't necessarily treated equally. And one of the big things that the Muslims did to profit off these people and also kind of pressure them to change their beliefs was by charging them much higher taxes than the Muslims that lived in the area. This tax rate is known as the jizya. The jizya. And that's going to come up time and time again. Again, Islam did spread through warfare and trade and travel as well. But it wasn't always like a sword to the throat, convert or die. It usually wasn't quite that. It was usually pressure in other ways. And this is one of those ways. I mean, if a new army rolls in, and this is one of the main ways that religion spread through warfare in general. A new army rolls into town and they have a certain belief system, and they're the government now. It makes it a little bit easier on you and your life if you kind of change to what the elites, the people in power, believe. And if you didn't, at least if you were a Jew or a Christian, it was okay. You weren't necessarily going to be treated equally, but the biggest thing was the jizya. So throughout the early years, you have a succession of 4 caliphs. A lot of times they're called the 4 rightly guided caliphs because they're kind of the ones that take over directly after Muhammad. But there was always this contention. A lot of it had to do with that Sunni-Shia split. And, the majority of them were assassinated. It was really after this 4 caliph system, the patriarchal caliphs, or the Rashidun Caliphate, that you see a new caliphate rise up, made up mainly of merchants. Merchants are always treated with a lot of respect in the Islamic faith. And they found the next big caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate, which will rule the empire for nearly 90 years. Now, before we move on, we got the first of our video clips. I thought I was going to be able to get through all this today, and I don't know if I'll be able to. That's okay, no big deal. We'll probably change the plan a little bit up for the rest of the week. I'm going to have to kind of evaluate it through the end of the day. We may end up having to push back the SAQ, but we will see. We will see. That may get moved. But again, let me kind of evaluate where we end up and see how much we got to get done. So we're going to watch our first video. And all this does is it kind of elaborates on that split between Sunni and Shiite. Which again, is something that you still see going on. Remember, at its root, It was a difference of opinion as to who should take over after Muhammad. But that's caused a lot of animosity to this day. A lot of the violence that you see in the Middle East, in North Africa, between different groups of Muslims, well, a lot of it is rooted in this basic difference of opinion that caused these different branches of Islam to form. So pay attention and enjoy the Sunni Shiite split.
The terms Sunnis and Shiites get thrown around a lot when discussing Middle Eastern conflicts. Sometimes it's
And hey, you guys online for the videos, you'll need to watch those on your own, okay? They're in Canvas.
With over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, there's no way they can all be involved in some Hatfields and McCoy-style blood feud. So what's really going on here? Well, first of all, not all Sunnis and Shiites are at war with each other. There are tons of places where they coexist peacefully, like the United Arab Emirates, or Dearborn, Michigan, for example. It's also worth noting that their religions aren't diametrically opposed. In fact, the Sunni-Shiite conflict isn't even really about religion, it's about power. Originally, Muslims were all one group, unified under the Prophet Muhammad. Then, in the year 632, Muhammad died, and Muslims split off into two separate groups. The Sunnis wanted Muhammad's successor to be chosen by his community of followers, while the Shiites wanted the leadership to stay within the Prophet's family. The Sunnis were in the majority, so they chose their new leader to be the Caliph, which is basically the head of state. The Shiites did not recognize this new leader, and instead, they chose Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, as their new imam, which also basically means head of state. That was the main source of divide, and from there, things really only got worse. Early on, most of the Shiite imams met violent ends at the hands of the stronger Sunni caliphs, including Imam Ali's son, Hussein, whose beheading is still considered a major holiday for Shiite Muslims. Today, there are numerous Sunni and Shiite militant groups, terrorist organizations, and oppressive governments. Being Sunni or Shiite doesn't necessarily make you a member or even a supporter of those groups, but they're still divided up that way. In fact, every nation with Sunni-Shiite conflicts has large militant groups on both sides, and they all have a history of oppressing one another depending on who's currently in power. Iraq, for example, was run by an oppressive Shiite regime before Saddam, then an oppressive Sunni regime under Saddam, followed by an oppressive Shiite regime once again after Saddam left power. Now the oppressive Sunni militant group ISIS is threatening to take over huge parts of the country. So you can see that the Sunni-Shiite conflicts are more about power, politics, and retribution than actual religion. And truthfully, the words Sunni and Shiite aren't even the best words to use when discussing Sunni-Shiite conflicts. They are way too general. If you're talking about militant jihadists or terrorist networks, but what you really mean is ISIS or Al-Qaeda, just say ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Otherwise, you're including billions of people who aren't even involved and most likely don't share the beliefs of those fringe organizations. If you'd like to learn more interesting information about...
You guys ever heard of ISIS? They're not as big a deal as they once were. They've mostly been dismantled, but there was a couple of years where they kind of established their own caliphate. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to establish a new Islamic empire where their leader was the leader of the empire, but also the leader of the faith. And they controlled wide swaths of Syria, Iraq, I think maybe even Lebanon. For several years now. Most of that land's been taken from them, but the group itself is still around. Again, you know, some of this stuff does carry over into modern times. We're going to do just a little bit more today. I thought if I just spoke fast enough, we can get through it all, and it just never happens. So there will be some shifts. I'm not going to be here tomorrow. And I'm now going to have to kind of change what I had planned for tomorrow because I'd hate to move on to a different region when Thursday I'll probably have to come back and us still be on Islam. So just kind of bear with me. Tomorrow I'll have some announcements kind of written out, and I'll make like a little intro video for what you guys are doing tomorrow. That'll kind of clarify. But in all likelihood, the SAQ that I had planned, we're going to push that back. That may not be, we may not do it at all. I don't know. We'll still kind of see. The discussion board is still going to be due tonight, but the SAQ again, I'm gonna have to tweak my plan for the week. So just kind of bear with me and definitely watch that introduction video tomorrow because that'll kind of spell out what the week is now going to be like. The Umayyad, they're kind of the first big caliphate that takes over post those original four caliphs. And, you know, during their time period, they spread, they were really, really big. They fought against the Byzantine Empire, the former Roman Empire a lot, taking away some of their territories. Really helped to expand trade because this caliphate was kind of at the center of the Middle East, which has always been a crossroad for trade. But honestly, the big thing I want you to remember about the Umayyad, even after they lose most of their territory to a different group known as the Abbasids, they're the ones that retain power in Spain, at least for a while. Now, eventually, they kind of morph into different influences like the Moors, which we'll talk about later on. But they're the ones that kind of retain power in Spain. And guys, Spain and Portugal, even though they're European countries today, they were very much influenced by Islamic culture for several hundred years. It really wasn't until the mid-1400s that Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, the same people that paid for Columbus's voyages, forced the last remaining Muslim strongholds out of the nation. But if you can just remember the Umayyad as the ones that kind of do set up a lot of the trade routes, but also kind of control the Iberian Peninsula for a time, you'll be in good shape. And again, you can still see a lot of Islamic architecture in Spain to this day. The one that you really need to know about that kind of funnels into our current time period we're studying, 1200 to 1450. The Islamic Empire that really kind of sets the tone for a lot of the stuff to come, they are the Abbasid Caliphate. I think we're going to stop right here with the Abbasids, all right? So kind of what I'm thinking, and again, look out for the announcements. I'm thinking tomorrow while I'm gone, I had another idea. You guys will probably be doing some real basic document analysis. I do have some old Islam docs that I think would be beneficial to read. So as opposed to the SAQ for this week, I think you're going to have a short document analysis assignment instead. Again, I'm kind of figuring this out on the fly, but I knew that this could potentially happen because I just go on and on and on. So we'll probably do that on Wednesday when I'm gone. It'll be pretty self-explanatory. On Thursday, we're going to finish this up, because I can definitely do it in 2 days. We'll finish this up on Thursday. Then on Friday, I'm still kind of debating. We may do a little bit on South and Southeast Asia. It kind of depends on how much time we have. But, more on that later. So tomorrow, more than likely, document analysis. On Thursday, we'll finish this up. And then on Friday, we'll just kind of wait and see. You guys did a good job. Remember, we're going to continue on with these notes. So if there's some stuff that you missed, by all means, get it done. We will finish this up on Thursday. But again, considering you should have already previewed all this, please get your discussion board done by tonight at 11:59. And that is all.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
All right. We'll see you guys.
All right. Bye.
Is this a mid?
Yeah.
Discussion.
No, that's all of it. Well, did you already submit it?
Yeah.
I don't see anything as a problem. So let's look at I'm gonna put resubmit. Yeah, you got to type in your answers down here.
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay, well maybe you just can't see it on your end. I'll check if for some reason it doesn't come through. We'll figure it out. Remind me on Thursday.
Okay.
All right, thank you, man.